Hey everyone, and welcome back. I'm Rick Fussell and this is the Ingrain Workshop. In today's video, we're going to be building 3 classic tri-squares out of brass and black walnut. That's coming up next here at the Ingrain Workshop. We're kicking things off with a nice chunk of black walnut. This blank measures 7.5 inches by 5 inches. From that, we'll be cutting out 3 tri-squares. The large one will come in at 2 7/16 inches wide by 6 3/4 inches long. The medium square will be 1.5 inches wide by 4 1/8 inches long. And the small one is just 15/16 of an inch wide and 1.5 inches long. And there you have it, the Papa Bear, the Mama Bear, and the Baby Bear of shop squares, all ready to keep things just right. Over at the table saw with my trusty crosscut sled, I'm ripping the blank for the Papa Bear at 2 7/16 inches wide. Then I'll rotate the piece and cut it down to its final length of 6 3/4 inches. With the big guy done, I'll rinse and repeat for the Mama Bear and the Baby Bear. And just like that, all 3 bears are trimmed up to their final lengths and widths, no porridge required. With the heads cut to their final sizes, it's time to focus on the Goldilocks of brass blades. I ordered 1 piece of 1/8 inch by 1 inch by 12 inch brass stock and 2 pieces of 1/8 inch by 2 inch by 12 inches of flat brass stock from Amazon to make up the 3 blades. Links are down in the video description if you want to follow along at home. The large blade will be 2 inches by 11 3/8 inches, so that one's already at its final width. Easy win. But for the medium and small blades, I'll need to trim them down to size. The small blade will end up at 3/4 inches by 4 1/4 inches, and the medium blade will be 1 1/4 inches by 7 inches. I'm cutting these down right here at the table saw. You can actually cut soft metals like brass and aluminum using standard woodworking tools. Just another reason we love this hobby. Using some double-sided carpet tape and a scrap of plywood with a straight edge, I'll secure the brass blank to the plywood and use my table saw fence as a guide. I'll take it slowly, starting by trimming about 1/16 of an inch off one side, then flip it around and cut it down to its final width. Slow and steady wins the race and keeps your fingers attached. Next up, I'll cut the blades to their final lengths. Still at the table saw with my crosscut sled and with the brass blanks still taped to the scrap plywood, I'll trim about 1/16 of an inch off of one end, then flip them around and cut to the final length using my stop block as a guide. With the blades dialed in, it's time to cut the wearing strips that go on the reference side of each head. For these, I'm using 1/16 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch by 12 inch flat brass stock. Links in the description below if you're feeling fancy. Since all the heads are 9/16 of an inch thick, I can rip all the strips at once at the table saw, same method as I used before, and then cut them down to their final lengths using the crosscut sled. The length of each strip will match the corresponding head. Papa Bear, Mama Bear, and Baby Bear all get their own little brass slippers. Now it's time to sand the blades. I use double-sided tape to stick down sheets of 120, 220, and 400 grit sandpaper right on top of my table saw. It's the flattest surface in the shop, and hey, you've got to make that thing earn its keep. With the blades still attached to the scrap plywood, I started sanding using the table saw fence as a reference to keep everything nice and parallel. Once one side is smoothed out, I'll flip the blade over and sand the opposite side, working my way through all the grits. It's a bit of a workout, but at least this way I can skip arm day at the gym. And I also sanded the sides of the blades as well, just to keep things parallel and square. Next, I'll need to lay out the profile at the top of each blade. You can definitely get creative with this part, but I'm going with a classic old school look, a combination of a concave and a convex curve separated by a crisp little 90-degree edge. For the curves, I'm using a 3/4 inch radius on the small blade, 1 1/8 inch for the medium, and 1 7/8 of an inch for the large. To keep things easy, I printed out the actual size profiles on some thick cardstock and cut them out. I'll lay each one on the end of its blade, and using a Sharpie, color in the negative space I'll need to cut away with the hacksaw. Basically, it's like coloring inside the lines, except we're cutting the lines out later. With the blade secured in my vise, I'm using a hacksaw to cut out the bulk of the waste. You can actually get surprisingly close with this method, and it's faster than you might think. I'll repeat this process for all 3 blades. Next, using a flat cross-hatched file, I'll start shaping the convex curve and the flat edge, filing it down until I'm about a 32nd of an inch from my Sharpie line. Then I'll switch to the concave cross-hatched file to shape the concave curve, again stopping about a 32nd of an inch from the line. Once the rough shaping is done, then I'll move to the sandpaper, starting with 120 grit and working my way up to 400 grit, fine-tuning the profile until it's looking just right. It's a bit of a workout, but nothing says precision like a good old-fashioned hand file and some elbow grease. And a pro tip here, when you're sanding the profile, you always want to be sanding with the grain and not across it. And as you can see here, the profile turned out pretty nice. At this point, we should have all our blades sanded and the profiles cut on the ends of all 3 squares. We've also got the heads cut out and the wearing strips prepped for each size. Now, I cut the wearing strips just slightly oversized, about a 32nd of an inch bigger than needed, so I can sand them down flush after they're secured. Trust me, you don't want to cut them the exact size right away. Giving yourself a little bit of extra makes it way easier to get a perfect fit later. Next up, I'm going to secure the wearing strips to the heads using some CA glue. Good old-fashioned super glue gets the job done. Just don't glue your fingers to the square unless you want to be a square. Next, I need to drill holes and drive in some small brass screws to make that connection between the wearing strip and the head permanent. I'll start by laying out the hole locations. Since all of the heads are 9/16 of an inch thick, I measure 7/64 of an inch in from the face of the head on each side. This is where I'll drill my 2 rows of screws. I'm installing 3 screws in each row. For the small head, I'll place 1 screw in the center of each row and 2 more at the ends of each row, spaced 5/16 of an inch from the ends of the head. For the medium head, same idea, but the end screws will be a 1/2 inch from the ends. And for the large head, the end screws will be 13/16 of an inch from the ends. It's a bit of measuring, but hey, nothing says precision woodworking like a square held together with tiny brass screws. To keep the holes and countersinks nice and consistent, I used the drill press with my fence and stop blocks set up. I clamped each head to the fence using an F-clamp and then drilled out all the holes right where I marked them. With the holes drilled, I grabbed a small Phillips head screwdriver and gently drove in all 6 screws per head. Once all the screws are snugged up, you can file and sand the screw heads and the wearing strip flush with the surface, so everything looks clean and feels smooth. After all, nothing says handcrafted like making brass and walnut play perfectly nice together. Now it's time to make a custom push block so I can safely cut the slots in the heads for the blades. For the push block, I used a piece of hardwood the same thickness as the heads, 9/16 of an inch. Then I attached a piece of 1/4 inch plywood to act as a backer, keeping the head flush up against the table saw fence. I just used some good old-fashioned double-sided tape to stick the hardwood to the plywood. Simple but effective. With this setup, I can safely push the heads, rotated vertically, through the table saw to cut the slot on the end. I'm also using double-sided tape to fasten each head to the push block, because the last thing you want is your workpiece taking a joyride mid-cut. For the table saw setup, I started by cutting some test pieces and tweaking the fence until I was confident that the slot was dead center of the head. Once I had the slot dialed in, I could leave the fence alone and cut the slots in all 3 heads without any more side-to-side adjustments. I did still need to adjust the blade height for each head. For the large head, I set the blade height to 1 13/16 of an inch. For the medium head, 1 1/8 inches. And for the small head, 11/16 of an inch. A bit of back and forth, but once it's set up right, the cuts go smooth, and no surprises when you slide those blades in later. The blades are secured to the heads with 3 rivets, but before I can drill the holes, I need to make sure the blade is seated firmly and square in the head. To do that, I apply a bit of super glue to the blade first, then install it in the head using a corner square as a guide while the glue dries. I used a mix of spring clamps for the smaller squares and F-clamps for the larger one to make sure everything stayed tight against the corner square. Then I held it up to the light to double check. If I can't see any light peeking through between the blade, head, and square, I know we're in business. As always, measure twice and squint hard to make sure it's actually square. Now that the blades are glued to the heads, it's time to lock them in for good with brass rivets. For the small square, I'm using 3/16 inch diameter rivets. For the medium one, 5/16 of an inch, and for the large one, a 1/2 inch rivet. As you can see, these rivets have a male and female end, and they fit together just like you'd expect. Snap them in nice and snug. But since the heads are only 9/16 of an inch thick, the stock rivets are too long. To get a tight fit without any proud end sticking out, I'll cut down the female rivets only to about 1/4 of an inch. That way they'll connect cleanly inside the head without poking through where they don't belong. Once that's done, I'll drill out the 3 rivet holes in each head, drop in the rivets, and mount them up, locking everything down tighter than a drum. For the rivet placement on the small square, the first column of rivets will be 7/32 of an inch from the end of the head, and the second column will be a 1/2 inch from the end. The 2 rivets in the first column are spaced 1/4 inch up from the bottom and 1/4 inch down from the top, while the single rivet in the second column will be centered right in the middle of the head. For the medium square, the first column will be 3/8 of an inch from the end of the head, and the second column 5/16 of an inch from the end. The first column rivets will sit 3/8 of an inch up from the bottom and down from the top, and again the second column's rivets go right in the center. And for the large square, the first column is 5/8 of an inch from the end, and the second column is 1 9/16 of an inch from the end. The 2 rivets in the first column are 5/8 of an inch up from the bottom and down from the top, and you guessed it, the second column rivet is centered. It's a bit of measuring marathon, but hey, it's what makes these 3 tri-squares both functional and sharp looking. To make it easier to cut the female rivets down to 1/4 of an inch, I grabbed a scrap piece of 2x material and drilled and countersunk holes for the 3/16, the 5/16, and the 1/2 inch rivets. That way I can drop the rivets in snug and they'll stay put while I trim them down. Once they're seated, I just head over to the bandsaw and slice off 1/4 of an inch, quick, clean, and no lost fingers, chasing little brass parts across the shop. Over at the drill press, I start by drilling out the shaft of each hole all the way through the square. Then I'll come back and drill out the countersink for the rivet head. The goal here is to have the rivet head sit just a little proud, about 1/32 of an inch, so I can come back later and sand it flush for a nice clean finish. It's one of those little details that really makes the whole thing look sharp. Plus, there's something satisfying about sanding those rivet heads down just right. Using a ball-peen hammer and the little anvil on the back of my vise, I'm going to seat the rivets through the head and the blade. Once the rivets are snug and secure, it's back over to the table saw to sand everything down flush, working my way through the grit progressions until it's as smooth as glass. With the sanding done, it's time to make these brass accents shine. I'll tape off the wood and polish up the brass using my buffing wheel until it gleams. After that, I'll flip the script, taping off the brass to get ready for the tung oil finish on the wood. It's like a well-choreographed dance between tape, polish, and finish. Once the tung oil is dry, I'll scuff it down lightly with some 4-aught steel wool, then apply a coat of Johnson's paste wax, my go-to classic finish for all my handmade tools. It gives everything a silky smooth feel and that nice understated sheen, plus nothing says finish like the smell of fresh wax in the shop, kind of like the smell of napalm in the morning. And there you have it, 3 beautifully crafted classic tri-squares, ready for action in the shop. Whether it's the Papa Bear, Mama Bear, or Baby Bear, each one is built to last and made to be both functional and a joy to look at. I hope you enjoyed following along with this build and maybe got inspired to make a set of your own. Well, that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you guys found this video useful, and if you did, then please leave it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel and you like DIY and woodworking projects, then I highly recommend that you smash that subscribe button. It's free and painless, and I'd also ask that you ring that bell icon. That way you'll be notified of all our upcoming videos. As always, to all my existing subscribers, I really appreciate all the support you've given this channel. Now I'll leave links in the video description below to where you can pick up all the tools and equipment that I used on this build, and that's another way for you to support the channel. And if you're really feeling generous, you can always leave us a special thanks. And as always, the best tool in your workshop is the one you made. I'm Rick with the Ingrain Workshop. Until next time, have a wonderful day and God bless.